Welcome to the Minnesota Rovers Tuesday evening presentation. Minnesota Rovers is an outdoors club based in Minneapolis, St. Paul. Our members organize trips that range from 1 hour to 2 weeks in Minnesota or further afield. Examples of our activities include hiking, biking, backpacking, skiing, snowshoeing, paddling, and rock climbing. We also organize conservation and trail clearing trips. Our members have experience and skills in many outdoor activities, so if you want to learn a new outdoor activity, we can probably help you. For more information, go to mnrovers.org. Now let's move on to this week's presentation.
Tonight, you're here to hear about the Great Plains Trail. Tonight's presenter is the founder and director of the Great Plains Trail Alliance, a nonprofit dedicated to creating and preserving the Great Plains Trail. Steve is an avid hiker, mountain biker, cross-country skier, and general outdoor enthusiast. Steve grew up in Plymouth, Minnesota, but has traveled and lived extensively in the Western U.S. He currently lives with his wife, Stephanie, in the great outdoor city of Duluth, Minnesota. Please welcome Steve Myers.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to hit share screen here. My name's Steve Myers, and as she mentioned, I'm the founder and director of Great Plains Trail Alliance. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit tonight about, and thanks everybody for having me. Sounds like a really great outdoor group, so pretty excited to be here. Talk to you a little bit about the Great Plains in general, and also about my project, the Great Plains Trail. Super quickly, think Appalachian Trail and Pacific Crest Trail. It's a long distance trail, just in a really different part of the country. And it's a 2,200 miles. We'll talk a little bit about it. You'll get to see some of the highlights of it. It's a part of the country that has kind of a reputation for being boring. So I'm excited that you guys showed up to listen to something about the Great Plains, because it has this kind of reputation for being boring. And I hope that my goal tonight is to get you to think that that's really not the case. There's a lot out there to see, a lot to do, a lot to look at, a lot to find. So let's talk about that a little bit. There we go. This is a quote from Candace Savage. There are people who think of the prairie as boring, and it is hard not to pity them. Oh, and I was going to mention that I'm happy to have a question and answer when we get done, but I think we'll save it till the end. It just sort of works better for me. Which I think is true. It's true a little bit about the prairies, is that they kind of have that, for lack of a better word, sort of a stereotype. We kind of stereotype people, and we stereotype places as well. And that's too bad. And I think that the Great Plains is not boring, and it's not flat. It's not all the things that people think that it is. Some people think that it is. So let's talk a little bit about the Great Plains in general. This is an eco-region map of the continent, and this is showing kind of broad regions of the continent. The Great Plains is right there, the big brown area in the middle, which is number 9. And as you can see, it's huge. It's a huge area of the continent. As far as the 48 states, it's almost like 25%. And it's characterized by grassland. So it's where there isn't trees. Trees aren't the rule, grasses are the rule. And generally speaking, as you go from east to west, you get drier and drier. So it's tall grasses on the eastern side, and then shorter grasses on the western side. And this is what the EPA puts out for ecoregions. It's based on flora and fauna and climate and things like that. And since I'm talking to Minnesotans here, I think it's kind of interesting that even on this level, Minnesota actually has 3 regions on this, whereas a lot of states you can see have 1 region or maybe 2. Not too many states have 3 or more, so Minnesota is kind of a neat thing for that. It's the crossroads of the continent, so to speak. How big are the Great Plains? No one really knows. So here is a mashup of 50 different published versions of the size of the Great Plains. And as you can see, there's some agreement, but not a ton of agreement. The agreement comes over on the western end, which is the Rocky Mountain front. When when you get to the Rocky Mountains, you're no longer on the plains. That's pretty much agreed on. The eastern boundary of the Great Plains, not so much. You've got a lot of it sort of there in the middle of the Dakotas and Nebraska, and some as far east as Illinois. So there's a big gray area there as far as where that eastern boundary is. As we go on, I'm going to mention kind of where I think that eastern boundary is, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So this is you might be wondering why I'm showing you a map of Europe. We'll get to that in a second. This is to show you the sort of lack of grasslands in Europe and why that's important. The ecosystems of Europe, the grasslands are sort of this yellowish green color that you can kind of see there to the north of the Black Sea, right where Ukraine is. That ecologically is kind of a grassland area, and as you get further east into Asia. But certainly most of Europe, and certainly Western Europe, there are no big areas of grassland. It has mountains, it's got forests, it's got even deserts down in Spain, but no grasslands. So consequently, when Europeans came to the North American continent, when they arrived on the grasslands, they really didn't know what to make of it. They had no idea of what they were really seeing because they didn't have a parallel for that in Europe. And so they were kind of blown away by it, and they weren't sure what they were looking at. This is from 1840. A world of grass and flowers stretched around me, rising and falling in gentle undulations, as if an enchanter had struck the ocean swell, and it was at rest forever. So the kind of the theme of this is sort of an ocean, a sea, and that's actually another name of the Great Plains, is the Sea of Grass. And so that became a way for them to kind of describe it. This is from even 300 years earlier than that. I reached some plains so vast that I did not find their limit anywhere I went, although I traveled over them for more than 300 leagues, with no more landmarks than if we had been swallowed up by the sea. There was not a stone, nor a bit of rising ground, nor a tree, nor a shrub, nor anything to go by. So that was a Spanish expedition in what is now the northern panhandle of Texas, which actually is called the Llano Estacado, and that actually is a very almost table flat landscape with almost no landmarks at all. But another thing I want to hope to show you is that the reputation of the Great Plains for being flat is also not true. True in some places, but also there's buttes, there's canyons, there's rolling hills, there's quite a bit of topographical variety within the Great Plains that a lot of people don't tend to know about. So Europeans, when they arrived, didn't really understand the landscape, and consequently, they didn't stay. This is a map of national scenic trails and also national historic trails. And I'm going to concentrate on the historic trails for a minute. So think Lewis and Clark and the Oregon Trail and the California Trail and the Santa Fe Trail, the Pony Express, the Mormon Trail, all those various lines going across the plains. It was not a destination. They did not stay there. This was a place for them to get past, to get through, to get to the other side, to get to the mountains and get to the coast, or coming back the other way to get to the more well-watered places of the Midwest. They did not stay. In the earlier part of the 1800s, it was not a place for them that people were settling and staying. Eventually they did, and this is more like late 1800s. And when they did, the landscape changed. Particularly with the bison, there's a lot that has been said and known about the vast herds of bison that used to roam the plains in tens of millions. And in just a very, very short period of time in the late 1800s, just a decade or two, they were slaughtered down to, I believe it's 7, or it's a single digit number anyway, incredibly small number from their vast numbers. And so there was these changes that occurred on the plains. My presentation is not is not about what's been lost in the plains. I think there's a lot that's been written about that. You could talk about that forever. My presentation is about what's still there. What can you see? What can you do? What can you still experience on the plains? And if you're going to go experience the plains, the main thing is you've got to get out of your car. You got to get, like you do in anything. You guys are the rovers, you know that. You got to get out to experience anything. You got to get out of your car, off the interstate, off even the secondary highways, onto some dirt roads, get out and really sort of immerse yourself in that landscape and see what it's all about. It is so easy, too easy to be swept away by mountains and ocean. A prairie, on the other hand, requests the favor of your closer attention. It does not divulge itself to mere passers-by. That's Suzanne Winkler from 2004. And so this idea of getting out and seeing it and experience it and having an adventure in it is the seed of the idea for the Great Plains Trail. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about what the Great Plains Trail is and it's sort of the project that I'm involved in. Real quickly, it's 2,200 miles. It covers 7 states, 3 national parks, 3 national monuments, 10 national forests or grasslands, 5 state high points, and 15 state parks. So the idea is to link up all of these various, scenic points along the way and have it be able to be hiked or biked or even horse ride in between. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that's what it is in general. I'm going to kind of take a little tour of it here in a little bit, but I want to talk a little bit about kind of how I came to the idea. And that is, of course, not from the plains. That is a picture of the Tetons in Wyoming. Well, when I was in college, I went to Augsburg College in Minneapolis. One fine day, I walked into the Commons and I saw a poster, and the poster looked just like that. And I didn't know anything about that. And I just said, I'm going to go there. And this was 1990 and pre-internet. So I grabbed a little sheet of paper that was attached to the poster, and I filled out my address and name and sent it in there and got a job application to go work the summer in Grand Teton National Park at one of the lodges. And I spent a number of summers out there enjoying the mountains and hiking and getting into the outdoors. And I didn't experience that as much as a kid growing up, but when I got out there as a young man, I decided this is really what I want to do. I want to be outside. I want to be out hiking, doing stuff. So got really excited about it. Well, in between the state of Minnesota and the state of Wyoming, as you know, is the state of South Dakota. And if you know anything about South Dakota, if you're from there, you know people from there, it's really kind of 2 states. And people in South Dakota refer to it as either East River or West River. And the Missouri River, of course, cuts right down the middle of it and divides that state, and the two sides are very different. And so traveling across it as a young man, coming across the eastern side of the state through Sioux Falls and Mitchell and places like that, it looks a lot like Minnesota. It's pleasant rural farm country. And then you get to the Missouri River and you cross over and you get over to the other side and you have these huge bluffs and you get up on top of them and suddenly the trees disappear and you can see to the horizon and there's buttes on the horizon and there's this wide open space. And it's completely different landscape. And it's really, in my mind, it's kind of where you transition very quickly from the Midwest to the West. And that's what I think is the eastern boundary of the Great Plains, when you no longer feel like you're in the well-watered farm country of the Midwest, but you're in the drier, wide open country, ranch country of the West. And so I was kind of blown away by that as well. I mean, I went to Wyoming. I had spent time in the mountains. I hadn't experienced mountains before, but the difference was I had seen pictures of mountains. I at least had some idea what to expect with what a mountain looks like. I had never seen pictures of the Great Plains or had any idea what was out there. And so when I was experiencing it, I guess I felt a little bit like, some of those early Europeans. I was just kind of floored, didn't know what to do, didn't know how to describe it, but I thought it was pretty neat and I thought it would be pretty cool to have an adventure in a place like that. And the overriding sense out on the Great Plains is space. Just that ability to see the horizon all around you and to kind of be in that space is pretty amazing. Here in Minnesota, a lot of woods and a lot of tight spaces and things like that. And that's pretty great. But out there, it is just a completely different type of experience and one that is pretty exciting. So I want to talk a little bit more about the trail itself. And here is a line on a map to kind of give you an idea of the general route. The southern terminus is in Guadalupe Mountains National Park. It's the top of Guadalupe Peak. Earlier, somebody was mentioning a trip to Katahdin in Maine, which is the northern terminus of the Appalachian Trail. And so the southern terminus of the Great Plains Trail is also a state high point, Guadalupe Peak. From there, it goes north. I'm kind of going south to north through New Mexico. And then it briefly touches Oklahoma and actually hits the state high point of Oklahoma, and then into Colorado, into western Nebraska, and then up through the Black Hills, following the Centennial Trail, which is a 110-mile trail through the Black Hills, and then into western North Dakota and the Badlands and Theodore Roosevelt National Park in North Dakota. You might notice there's a little fork there on the north end where it kind of splits and looks like it goes into Montana and North Dakota. There's some uncertainty as to where the northern terminus should be, but I'm pretty sure it's going to end up being in North Dakota just because it's a little bit easier to work with than those huge spaces out there in eastern Montana in between towns and things like that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So let's take a trip. Let's show you a few highlights of it. This is Guadalupe Peak. This is in Guadalupe Mountains National Park, Texas. This is from near the summit of that mountain. Not probably technically on the Great Plains, but you can see it from there. And like I said, I thought that was kind of a neat thing to have a state high point as the terminus of the trail. Going north from there, this is New Mexico. This is at Capulin Volcano National Monument. This is northeast New Mexico. It's a huge, it's kind of a series of old dormant volcanoes in that area, which are pretty neat. This one happens to be a national monument, and it's a pretty scenic, pretty neat area to be. Going north from there, this is Oklahoma. Oklahoma, that far western panhandle is pretty deserty, kind of mesas and canyons and rattlesnakes and cholla cactus and things like that. Feels more deserty, but is still part of the plains. That southern half of the plains feels a lot of times more like a desert than the northern half, but very scenic, and also hits the state high point. Then it goes through Colorado. Now, this picture here might not be the type of Colorado picture you're used to seeing. You're used to seeing huge snow-capped peaks in Colorado. Sometimes people forget that a third of that state is out on the plains, and some of it looks a little bit like this. This is a bit north of Denver. And one thing that was kind of neat, I lived in Colorado for quite a while. In fact, was getting the project going while living in Colorado. And one of the things that drove me to do it as well was that you go up into the mountains in Colorado, and I love the mountains as much as anybody else, but it's crowded there. It is absolutely, you can't get anywhere there without trailheads, roads, highways, freeways. It's super crowded. Come out onto the plains, there's some beautiful hikes to do out there, and you pretty much have it to yourself, which was kind of nice. Going north from there, this is Nebraska. Also, maybe not the typical Nebraska scene you might be thinking of. You might have been thinking cornfields or something like that, but this is far western Nebraska. This is a place called Fort Robinson State Park. Beautiful, beautiful spot. It's actually become probably one of my favorite spots. This is a lot of what the park looks like, these huge sandstone bluffs. Also it's in an area called the Pine Ridge, which reminds me a lot. It's a lot like the Black Hills, just a little bit smaller, not quite as topographical as the Black Hills, but also a very nice area. And just as a quick addition to that, the history at Fort Robinson is super cool. This is an old Army fort, and it's where Crazy Horse was killed. And there's a little monument there to that. And one of the cool things about exploring the Great Plains is the history that you learn there. So much history, especially in the late 1800s with the conflict between the U.S. Army and Native Americans. There's so many well-documented, photographed history that you can dive into at almost any point. I have a little saying that if you want to learn American history, you should go to Boston and the Great Plains. Those are the two best places to learn about American history. So that's been a really fun part to learn as well. Going north, this is an example of South Dakota, the trail in South Dakota. This is a little north of the Black Hills. It's a little area of Custer National Forest, which kind of has these white chalky buttes and Pine Ridge as well. So very pleasant place to walk around for sure. And going north from there, this is a little bit different time of year, but this is Theodore Roosevelt National Park in North Dakota. It's got two units there, the south unit and the north unit. This is the north unit, which I think is the more spectacular of the two. The south unit is great too, but it's almost like a mini Grand Canyon. It's again, the idea that the Great Plains aren't flat. Pretty cool. And if you want to see bison, go to Theodore Roosevelt National Park. You will see bison there for sure. There's a big herd there, and they're just kind of around all over the place. So that is a really, really quick trip through the Great Plains, through the Great Plains Trail. And I want to talk a little bit more about kind of try to get a sense of what it's like to be out there. And again, I'm going to talk about that sense of space. In 2018, we were lucky enough to have an article about our project written in Backpacker magazine. And so we did a kind of a larger expedition out there in preparation for that. And this was sort of the final night of the trip. This was our campsite. And it's just still to this day, it's one of the coolest places I've ever spent the night. I've, of course, been used to camping in woods and lakes and things like that, and all of those things are great. But to be out in that kind of space, to spend the night and have the stars and everything out was really quite incredible. And so the next thing I want to share with you is a short video from this exact spot, and it's about 20 or 30 seconds. And the first couple of seconds, you'll see the person who is taking this photo, and it kind of pans around and shows you kind of the scene. This is in far, far western Nebraska, just a little bit south of the South Dakota border. So that is, you can kind of see the Pine Ridge to the south there. You can see that there's a lot of topographical relief there. Some of that, the Pine Ridge is 500, 600, 700 feet high. So there's a lot to do, a lot to see there. I hope you could kind of get a sense of the peace and quiet in those open spaces. Moving on, in 2016, actually a little bit before that, I got contacted from Luke Strider Jordan, another Minnesotan, kind of famous in the long distance trail community. Somebody was talking about the border route in the lead up to this. Luke Jordan, just out of college in 2012, I believe, did a through hike on the North Country Trail, which of course goes across the border route and the Superior Hiking Trail and so on. And I believe it starts in North Dakota and ends in Vermont. It's the longest national scenic trail. And I think he was the fourth or fifth person to ever through hike it. He contacted me and he wanted to be the first person to ever hike the Great Plains Trail. He'd heard about the project. And when he said that, I said, well, there's no way, we're not ready. And then I think my next sentence was, yeah, let's do it. So if we wait till we're ready, we'll never do anything. So we spent some time planning it out, and he did a full through hike in 90 days of the whole Great Plains Trail. I'm going to give you a really, really quick version of his hike. He also does the speaking circuit. If you guys are interested down the line as a follow-up to this, I'm sure he'd be more than happy to give a full presentation of his hike. I can give you just a couple quick little highlights. Here he is at the top, at the southern terminus, at the top of Guadalupe Peak in Texas at the very beginning. So I'm just going to go through a couple little things. Here he is in New Mexico, and I'm showing you this picture because you can see that he's on a road. And I guess the main thing on here is I don't want to give everyone the impression that this is a done deal, that the Great Plains Trail is finished and it's a single track hike the whole way with signs and cabins and huts and all of that kind of stuff. There's no way, we're not anywhere near to that point. It's still very much an adventure out there, and much of the trail is on quiet dirt roads like this, particularly in the southern half, particularly in New Mexico, because we have no other option. There's a lot of private land there, and so there's a county road that cuts through, and that's really your only public space. Now, that said, most of those walks are pretty enjoyable, and some of them see just 2, 3, 4 cars a day. It's not like there's trucks and semis whipping by all the time. So I found that to be pretty enjoyable experience anyway, even though you're on a road. We also had to have some vehicle support in the southern half of the trail. I think you can see my truck there off on the side. I would pick him up at the end of the day, drop him off where he left off, so he could continue his hike, so he could get back to we could get back to a town or a campground or something like that. Because some of the distances down there are simply too far for somebody to walk in one day. Sometimes it's 70 or 75 miles in between, a legal place to spend the night. That said, there are lots of opportunities there, and as the trail develops and grows, those things can be figured out over time. But as it is now, that's kind of the reality of it. Here he is in Nebraska. That's at the same spot where I showed you the video. I just want to mention that there was some of those challenges like down in New Mexico that we knew about. And then there was all kinds of things we didn't know about. One thing is the idea of trail angels. The Appalachian Trail is well known that there are these things called trail angels that will help you out along the way, and you don't know where they're coming, and it's kind of trail magic, and they might give you a candy bar or a gallon of water or whatever it is that you need along the trail. And that's a well-established trail with thousands of hikers a year. Luke is the first person to ever do this, and no one knew he was doing it. We didn't promote it. Only his family and a few other people even knew he was attempting this. And we had trail angels along the way despite that, which we thought was pretty incredible. I'll let him tell all those stories at some other time, but just to give you an idea, the mayor of the town that was nearby here came out and gave him a pizza and $25 or something like that. And he got rescued from a blizzard that he was out in, I think that was in southern Colorado. And so it was really just all along the trail. He had all kinds of trail magic and trail angels that would show up just kind of when he needed it as he was cruising along, which we thought was kind of blew us away. Did not expect that at all. And he made it. There he is at the U.S. Saskatchewan international boundary. 90 days later, he averaged something around 25 miles a day. So, which is pretty crazy, but he's in great shape, and he was, I don't know, 27 or 28 at the time, I suppose. So pretty nice to be in your 20s. So I want to talk a little bit about my organization. It's Great Plains Trail Alliance. We are a 501c3. We started in 2012. And that's our goal. Our goal is to create this trail, find a way to create it, promote it, and see how far it can get and how much of it can be completed and made into trail. One of our biggest goals is to get those road miles reduced and trail miles increased. We probably have, out of 2,200 miles, I'd say about 400 are trail miles and the rest are road miles. So we got a long ways to go to get there, but we've got lots of opportunities and lots of potential. We're super small. This is 4/5 of us. We're just a volunteer board. That's Luke Jordan Strider again on the far left, and then me. And that's Kevin, who runs a trail advocate website, and he lives in Colorado. And that is Bob, and he is a professor in Illinois who works with the National Park Service. And we have one other person, that's Clay. And Clay is kind of an adventurer and a long distance hiker as well. He's done the Appalachian Trail, the Pacific Crest Trail, the Continental Divide Trail. He's also done a big chunk of the Great Plains Trail. And it's our job to meet and decide what our next steps are. One of our next steps, or one of the things that we would like to be able to do, is to have the Great Plains Trail be a national scenic trail like the Pacific Crest Trail or the Appalachian Trail. And so this is a picture of President Lyndon Johnson. This is 1968, which is the year that he signed the National Scenic Trails System Act, and that brought in federal funding to all those trails, for some of them that were already existing and some that were, going to be created. And I happen to love this picture because he's looking right at the Great Plains, and it's almost as if he is wondering, geez, I wonder if there should be a line right about here in the Great Plains where we don't have currently a line for our National Scenic Trail. So I love that photo. And so the National Scenic Trails are part of the National Park Service, and we have recently this year connected ourselves in a small way with the National Park Service. This is Kat, and we're with the National Park Service Rails, Trails, and Conservation Assistance Program. So we're able to work with her this year, and we are in the final stages of getting some maps out there, some more detailed, more user-friendly maps that we're going to put on, some apps that you will be able to follow, at least for the Nebraska and the South Dakota sections. We're within a few weeks of getting those completed. I don't know the exact date, but we're getting pretty close. She's been a big help this year in doing that. This is from last summer. Went out and met with her, and there we are again in that's Fort Robinson State Park in western Nebraska. And so I'm hoping to work with them again this year and hoping to get some more things done as well. Here is our information as far as like social media and so on and so forth. We're not super active on that, but it's partially my fault because I'm not super into social media. I'm going to return to this slide in just a second, but I'm going to sort of wrap it up with kind of one other thought, and that is that I guess it's true with anything, but certainly with the Great Plains Trail, really doesn't matter what I say or what pictures I show you. The key is to be in the Great Plains. You can't really experience it until you've kind of found yourself in that kind of space. And it's a really kind of it's just an amazing thing. Very, very different than anything else out there. So that's my invitation to you is any way that you can, whether it's on the Great Plains Trail or just in Badlands National Park or whatever, get out there and find an adventure in the plains, and you won't regret it. So with that, I can go back to that slide there, and I guess I can open it up for questions. I'll hit stop share. Are there any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
First of all, I know your brother Greg.
Oh,
So that's how I actually asked you to come to
cool.
her, submitted this as an opportunity.
Great.
So
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
yeah, and I also worked in Grand Teton National Park for 2 summers. So
Nice.
anyway, I wanted to ask about how do I'm used to hiking where there's water, and I've always made that kind of one of my preferences, so I don't have to carry so much. How do you plan for this kind of hike? The amount of water, and where do you get it?
Right. So, well, and the whole challenge with this is attempting to plan it as if you are a solo through hiker.
Yeah.
So what Luke Jordan did, and he did have vehicle support there in that southern half. There's no way around it. But the rest of it, what we did is, well, one, he was a pretty strong hiker, so he brought a lot along and was carrying a lot of water. It's true. but we also stash some along the way.
Mhm.
So in some cases, we would go ahead and cache a couple of gallons of water for him at various points that we decided ahead of time. So when he got there, he would find water there. Otherwise, he's having to resupply in a town. So the trail does route through towns where possible, so that because that's kind of part of long distance hiking too, is being able to resupply and get things. Other through hikers mail things to themselves ahead of the trail so that when they get to a town, they can pick it up at a post office, whatever food or whatever else that they need. So also the other option out there in the plains are the windmills. So where the cattle drink. If you're on a ranch or near a ranch, you come across those quite a bit. And that's just well water that's getting pumped up. And so you're still going to want to filter it. But that's another option for water out there. And Luke did it too in the spring. He did it kind of as a northbound hike in the spring where the streams were still running and things were still kind of green and streams were still running. So he never had too much trouble with water. I think if you did it the other way, if you did it southbound in the fall, I think you'd have a lot more trouble with things being dried up and being more difficult to be able to find that. But
Yeah,
it's definitely a challenge.
thank you.
Mhm.
Eva, I have a question, and I'm Melissa Brown. I've done some of the Centennial Trail. Well, I've done all of the Centennial Trail, day hiking with someone. When you're on the Great Plains Trail, can you camp anywhere you want?
No, unless it's public land. So the trail goes through as much public land as possible.
Okay.
So the northern half, basically from sort of Denver area north, we pretty much have it figured out so that a solo hiker could do that unsupported, because there isn't anything further, than like 25 miles or 30 miles to the next, whether it's campsite or campground or town or whatever it is.
Okay.
But even so, in that, there are going to be some designated spots. Like you're going to have to get to the next thing because you are going to be going through private ranch land. And there are some spots where there's other options. There's BLM land. And but in certain cases, there's really you're going to have to go point to point. In some other spots, like in the Black Hills and in a few other places where there's more public land, in some of the national grasslands, you do have more options for camping where you want.
Is
But
your map comes out, is it going to be detailed enough to have some of that information?
Yeah, we'll have it'll show all of the campsites, campgrounds, public lands, that kind of stuff. So yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
Yeah, and it's going to be this first part is mostly going to be mostly from Scottsbluff National Monument in Nebraska to Bear Butte in South Dakota, which is approximately 350 miles of trail. And we're starting there because that's the most user friendly.
Yeah.
And obviously lots of opportunities to expand it north and south, but that's kind of our starting point. Any other questions?
How are we going to know when your map comes out?
Good question. I'm sure I'll be posting that to, Facebook and Twitter and things like that when we finally get that going. We're pretty close. We're almost there. I'm guessing 2 or 3 weeks.
Okay. Okay, so
And my understanding is that it will be on Gaia. And I'm not super great with apps either. I'm kind of a paper map guy, but so Gaia, I think, and Avenza, I believe, is
okay.
where it's going to be. So
Steve, there's a comment in the chat here about dealing with the lack of shade.
yeah. Yeah, it's a problem. If you're exposed out there, there's no question about it. The wind and shade are sometimes pretty hard to find. I mean, wind is easy to find. Shelter from the wind and shade sometimes can be pretty hard to find. So, and I remember when Clay did it, he did it. I tried to talk him out of doing it in August, but he decided to do it in August, and it was just he got really sunburned and exposed out there. So I think when I think about somebody doing a long hike out there, I don't think of summer as being the best time to do that. It's very hot, very dry, a lot of exposure. I kind of think of uh, fall, spring, and in some cases even winter. The long trek that we did on it, we did it in March. And yeah, we could have got hit with a blizzard for sure. We happened to get a nice stretch of weather, but it was very pleasant. We had cold nights, but it was, 40s, 50s during the day, which turns out to be pretty good for walking and covering some ground. So, but yeah, there certainly are those challenges out there. If I could wave a magic wand, I would be, and I could do whatever I wanted, I would put shelters along the way, even if they were just simple yurt-like shelters or cabin lean-tos or things that could get you out of the wind and out of the sun for a while. So that's kind of on the big dream list eventually. But I guess the other thing that I want to mention is that when I started this, and when I still kind of think of it as about 100-year project, I won't see the end of it. We're in the really, really early stages of that. So it's just a matter of the progress is slow and we just kind of keep chipping away at it. So I look at it as a 50 or 100-year project in order to get it to something that I would call sustainable. And sustainable to me is that people are using it, people are hiking it, whether that's even just a few dozen people a year or something like that I would kind of consider as sustainable, and creating a trail community so that sort of an online community where people can talk about what went well, what are the problems, what was great, what do sort of, how do you problem solve this, how do you problem solve that, and not having to come up with all the answers, but letting people do it, and letting those answers come as the trail grows and develops. If it succeeds, that's what success will look like. It'll look like other people solving all of these sorts of issues with various means. So that's kind of how any hiking things sort of happen. People say, hey, this works, try this, or this didn't work, don't do that, that kind of thing.
So how are you creating the trail? Are you just cobbling together trail paths that are already existing? You asking governments to, please combine these? And is it an obvious trail the whole way? Or are some of us going to get lost?
So yes, using existing trail is the first thing. So for example, like the Centennial Trail, the Mata Hay Trail in North Dakota. Excuse me, there's other smaller trails along the way that we kind of piggyback on and use those trails. The rest of it is route finding, connecting all those points. And as far as whether or not it's signed along the way, no, it is not. Which is why we're spending time on the map, because we think that that might be the best way to get people out there and hopefully not get lost. Is having a map that you can use while out there, so you can kind of know where the next thing is, and whether or not you're on the trail or off the trail. In some cases, it's pretty obvious. In some cases, it's not. But like I said, it's either trail or lonely dirt roads. And by lonely dirt roads, I really do mean that I've spent entire days out there on a dirt road and saw one car. So it's like a trail. And that's just because that's the only way to do it. So.
Let's see. Are there any other questions for Steve while we have him? I'll be looking for that map and sharing it if I see when you posted it.
Yep, and I can send you an email too, so we can get it out to the rovers too. So, yeah.
Great.
Well, I want to thank you guys so much for having me. It's been fun. And I want to join on some rover hikes too. So.
Well, thanks. So, yeah, well, yeah, we are active up in Duluth, so absolutely.
Awesome.
Yeah. Okay, well, so thank you so much, Steve, for joining us and telling us about this trail.
Thanks for watching this Minnesota Rovers presentation. If you want to see more, please click on the link to our channel or the subscribe button below. Thank you.